I guess we will just go ahead and get started. Mike, if you want to come on up.
Good morning, Mayor Bozen, members of the council. Michael Ludwig, Deputy Director of Development Services. This morning we have Charles Buki here from CZB to present an overview of the public review draft of the housing strategy. Just for your reference, our plan is we have a steering committee meeting this afternoon where we will go through the same presentation with the steering committee members, and then we're going to have about a 30-day public review period on this document. And then we anticipate bringing this back to council on your meeting on June 30th after we get that public feedback. So that's kind of the outline of schedule. In front of you this morning, you do have a summary page, which was prepared by our public information office that summarizes key points about the plan. You have a copy of the presentation Charles will be giving, and then you also have a copy of the full plan to take with you just to review. So if there are any questions that you have, please feel free to contact staff. We'll get you any information you need. And other than that, I'm going to turn it over to Charles and let him start off with the presentation.
Mike, can I just ask one question?
Sure.
I'm looking at, it says the city of Des Moines is launching a comprehensive housing strategy. Have we approved this? Did we vote on this? Or is this just something that's done? I mean, it's.
You approved the contract with CZB about it was August of a year ago in 2024. And so we've been working on the strategy with the consultants for the last 8 months. And then, as I said, we're going to have this out for public review and then bring it back on June 30th for action by council.
So we approved a contract.
You approved a
but we
contract with
didn't- But we
CZB.
didn't approve this housing
No,
strategy.
you'll be doing that in about a month.
Okay, all right. I'm just reading it, and it says, we're launching a comprehensive housing strategy.
We are launching, just say, go out and talk to the public about it. We're launching.
Okay.
Okay. With that, I'll turn it over to Charles. Thank you.
Morning, Mayor, Council. Let's see. As luck would have it, and always does seem to have it, I was on the plane yesterday reviewing notes, so I caught a few typos, so we'll clean those up. But one important one that's sort of more than a typo is we inaccurately listed in the document, I don't know what page, we'll find it, the free and reduced lunch percentages, which should be corrected from, I believe we listed 68.5 to 76%. But other than that, there are no substantive errors that I caught on the review. So let's see. I'll go through the slides. Mayor, give me, if you would, any direction just on whether you would like to pause at certain slides for Q&A, go through the slides and hold it to the end. Is there a way that you would prefer this to flow?
I think it's probably better, let's go through them, and then we'll
Okay.
come back to them, so we can get through it.
Okay. Okay, well, let's see. All right, so the slides are almost all things you've in one way, shape, or form seen before. They are excerpted from the document and from previous presentations, and I'll try to walk you through that, do some acknowledgments, a timeline review, and then sort of a walkthrough of the strategy itself. I do want to take a second at the front end on the acknowledgement side. I know you've heard me say this before. I've said it before for the same reason I'll say it today, which is as we as a consulting firm approach our 500th client city, it's become just crystal clear to us. We don't get an opportunity every day to work with staff as exceptional as the staff that Scott Sanders has assembled here in the city. Just through and through, exceptional. I was given pretty strict orders to not name people because invariably I would forget folks, but I do have to thank Cody and Mike for just steering this and staying with this just day in and day out for several months. So I want to thank them. We also had the opportunity we had 5 meetings with a public-private steering committee that provided exceptional feedback and guidance along the way. Members from the development community, both private and nonprofit, as well as the public sector. And so I want to acknowledge the excellent contributions from the steering committee. Going through the document timeline, we We're here, we're about 6 weeks later than we had anticipated. We spent a little bit more time at the back end refining things. So we added today's meeting and added an additional steering committee meeting, which Mike had alluded to a moment ago. We'll meet with them this afternoon. And parallel concurrent to that is the online engagement. So there will be some additional, interaction and feedback on the document content. This is a chart you've seen before. I decided it's a very valuable, good chart because it's sort of almost a one-stop shop presentation of what's going on. And so it's a good thumbnail sketch at a practical altitude, I think, to keep in mind when considering policy. I would draw your attention to the center right, where it says large number of smaller neglected stocks. It's a sizable number. That does two things. One thing it does is it keeps the city affordable, but that has costs. The other thing is it impacts the city's fiscal position, right? And so what that produces is what we conclude is a generally healthy market, right, with vulnerabilities, and we'll come back to that. You've seen this before, but I think this is an important way to, I think, see the entirety of the market. In the document itself, there are two big building blocks that are laid out right up front. One, as I just said, it's not an unhealthy market, but parts of the city market are unhealthy. I don't think that should come as any surprise to anyone. And that is alongside a strong community preference for affordability, but a preference that has to get reconciled against very real and very stubborn fiscal pressures. Right, and there's probably no better proxy for those stubborn fiscal pressures if you sort of go way downstream and look at the 76% free and reduced lunch number. The two can't be disconnected from one another. So when we, after spending wrestling for months with the data, we boiled down the strategy to really hinge on three imperatives. One, through a combination of development and redevelopment. The ambition is a more diverse housing supply with a wider array of choices. The second is to preserve a significant volume of naturally occurring affordable housing. And then the third is to really just push up the overall level of quality as much as possible, right? So those are these real just guiding imperatives that are present throughout the document. There are lots of findings, of course, but there are four key ones. And I've just alluded to them, but I want to go through them again just so that I'm very clear that they really constitute the boiled down crux of the matter. It's a generally healthy market, and it is an affordable market. But the affordability is largely a consequence of prevailing mediocre conditions, right, and also a very significant market gap, right, and that poses long-term risks. The third is that the significant affordability gap really, it itself derives from two building blocks. Low incomes on the one hand and economic segregation in the region on the other hand, right? So this goes to the fair share issues that we've talked about on our previous two meetings. And then finally, slowing rates of growth that are predicted both for the region, the state, the plains, the state, the Polk, Dallas County, Greater Warren region, and then the city itself, all mean, right? They all translate, if you look at production volumes historically, and then what it would take for production volumes going forward to compensate for some of the challenges, that what you have today constitutes 90% of what you're going to have in the future. And therefore, paying attention to the 90% is critical, right? That doesn't mean that the 10% isn't, that you're going to add, or 5, 8, 10, 12 isn't significant enough to focus a lot of energy on, but the 90% should not be ignored. So let's go through this a little bit at a time. So it's generally healthy and affordable, this first point. You'll notice on the chart on the left, and all this is in the document, but you'll notice on the chart on the left, you've done a very nice job catching up on rates of appreciation relative to inflation, right? So that's good. And what that says is owners of property are seeing a financial benefit, right, overall, right, for ownership. That's not true in every neighborhood, but across the city. That's pretty good. Now, it's also important to note that you're being outpaced by your competition, right? So That's actually that's the more important number. So you've got gains. It's as if you're improving your time on the track, right? But your composition is improving their time more so, right? And then balancing that out, you know, often when we see rates of appreciation outpacing inflation, as noted on the left, you will tend to see much higher value to income ratios and higher price to income ratios shown on the table on the right. However, that's not the case here, right? So you're hovering in that 293 space over there, right? And so that's a very strong indication that there is considerable affordability across the market, right? Now, I want to note that the value to income ratio is quite different than the price to income ratio. And so the leap from renting to owning is quite difficult here. And, you know, to move from renting to owning, right, is itself difficult, okay? So we've got value to income ratios and then price to income ratios, right? So the price to income ratios are high, reflecting tight inventory, high mortgage rates, and in the case of new construction, you know, high construction costs. So the second point, that affordability is largely a consequence of mediocre conditions and a significant market gap. You can see the suburban Polk County, after we've discounted for the city, continuing to outpace the city. At the same time, the city is slowly clawing back from a 56% to a 63% of county values, right? So it's improvement. It's important improvement, but there's still room to improve further. And then on the right, you'll see really this issue of fair share. We've talked about this previously on both occasions that I was here. You have something on the order of about 5,000 more households than you would have in a fair share distribution across the region who really just cannot afford more than $875 a month. And of course, the market's not going to produce that. And then at the other end, you've got a little bit more than 11,000 households who are able to spend $2,500 more a month, okay? And so you're short on that end. When we combine the two, right, when we combine the two, you really have the inputs that give you this chart on the right, your valued income ratios, right? All right, so if we go in a little bit further on point 3, despite the general affordability, you've got a significant affordability gap. So you are affordable, but that does not mean that there aren't lots of households really struggling to make rent. And so just the numbers are quite notable. You've got about 34,000 households, 35,000 households with incomes below $50,000. About a little bit more than 23,000 of those are cost burden, and of those, you've got close to 15,000 who are cost burden renters. Right now, when we take a look at what you've got from state and federal resources, you're really able to support something on the order of a little less than a third. Right, to really provide assistance to a little less than a third. If you flip that around, you need about 3.25 times your federal resources to be able to actually address that issue. So your federal resources at $36 million multiplied times 3.25, you would have to have something on the order of $105 million from the federal government in order to cope with the 15,000 odd cost burden renters at the bottom there, right?
How much did you say again? From the federal government?
You would need about 3 times what you've got. And so
Which is?
you're getting, right now your entitlements, in the 35 plus million, right? So just multiply that times 3.25, and whatever that number would come out to be would be what you'd need to completely address that sector.
That's what I thought you said.
It's a lot of zeros. That also there's a proviso there, right? It shouldn't go I think unremarked that I would not presume that the 35 to 36 now coming in, right, is 100% of the time used to your advantage. The rules that come with it actually oftentimes work against you, right? So three times more of what you've got that doesn't already work for you is not necessarily any better anyway, right? So you've got both a numerical issue and then a way we spend it issue, right? Okay. So this fourth point on rate of growth, when we take a look at projected growth for the Plains, for Iowa, for the region here in the capital, and then we look at your historic rates of growth versus projected rates of growth, that's how we end up with a really tricky issue, which is that, what you've, 90% of what you've gotten, what you have now will constitute 90% of what you're going to have, okay? So it's going to be very hard to make the case, very, very hard. You'll notice on the left bar, rightmost, Des Moines in blue, we don't know what the rate of growth for Des Moines will be. It's going to be a function of your capacity to compete against the suburbs, right? And so you would have to do an astonishing job there to actually ensure that 20 years from now, you had something lower than 90% of the future stock being comprised of what you have today. Where that leaves you is with what we've presented to you in our previous two meetings as a combination of two hard problems. Each individually hard, combined together, they're even more difficult. An affordability gap problem, which derives for several reasons, and a market gap problem, it too for several reasons. It's also the case that you've done actually remarkable work against both of these issues, right? And so some examples on your affordability gap success, would mean to really look at the success at Habitat and some of the other nonprofits, to take a look at the ion repair program, and then on the market gap issue, your utilization of increment financing, your redevelopment, your master planning, and Invest DSM are examples of really working on the market gap side. And so with that in mind, we developed these 4 building blocks for your strategy. One, we tried to put together a draft strategy for you to consider that builds on and connects what's been proven to work. The key word there would probably be connects. And so you've got the pieces. Now the job is very much to connect them more intentionally and to scale them, right? The second is utilizing a scaled and intentionally linked kit of parts with some new tools. We want to ground that on the key findings, right? We also want to cope with very real constraints. There are absolute constraints we want to work through, we want to be mindful of, and then keep our eye on 2 overarching goals that we planted in the draft on equal footing. One is to both strengthen the city's housing market, and then the second is, when possible, assist with addressing cost burdens faced by low-income households. So those are the building blocks. All right, so let's walk through this. What works? Scale and link invest DSM and ION. All right, there's nothing, almost nothing from a strategic point of view. In all of my experience, there's nothing not to like about those 2 programs. They function, they're well crafted, they're responsive. It's a great return for the taxpayer, and scaling them is critical. The second is, what works is multifamily rental for low-income housing, less so than home ownership. Multifamily rental gives you a much higher rate of return, and it lets you stretch scarce dollars further. As does prioritizing rehabilitation. As complicated as rehabilitation is, and as expensive as rehabilitation is, you get much more mileage out of rehabilitation on all kinds of fronts than solely on new construction. So it's not replacing new construction, and it's prioritizing, giving higher priority to rehabilitation. And then finally, it's linking any public dollars to a city purchase option, right? There are so many, in many cases, there's so many instances in the city where the city is at risk for a bad actor occupying a property that you want, at least before a moment of transference, if there's city resources in a deal, give the city the option, right, to at least hold the property to ensure you end up with, good disposition. So those would be the 4 pieces on the first building block. The second is the findings. We've gone through that. There's a significant market gap problem. It's in the billions. You have slower future growth rates, which means the clawback will be difficult on new construction alone. There's a lot of smaller 1-bathroom homes. They present a set of challenges. And then there's the affordability gap and its fair share challenges, across the region. Right? So that's the second piece. The third is there are some real constraints here. So we did, in the first part of this project, you may recall, we had an online survey. We had a lot of feedback from the community. The community did express some recognition of the importance of the market gap, but there was energetic recognition of the importance of addressing the affordability gap, right? So there's a lot of political support for addressing the affordability issue, right? But that to the extent, if we go back to these two issues, which are, hard to decouple from one another, right? So if we go back to those two issues, we put too much emphasis on one, we risk, worsening the other, and vice versa. So the public viewpoint, to some extent, becomes a constraint to work through and with, right? And then we've also got, in addition to that, public debt limits. There's only so much we can afford to borrow, regardless of what the borrowing rates are. So that's an issue. The state rollback provisions, we did the math on the rollback provisions. That's no joke. It makes the work of digging out quite difficult. Whether or not that's an intention, the rollback provision does make it difficult. We can't detect a consensus for higher quality in the community, right? So it's a higher quality issue. The argument is higher quality issues in higher costs usher in more affordability challenges. This goes back to this balancing act that we're all trying to address. And then finally, if you're dealing with resource scarcity, the opportunity cost equation is significant, right? What we don't spend money on has costs. What we do spend money on has costs. So we tried to take those into consideration. And then, just to reiterate those two overarching goals, we put on an equal footing on this strategy: the affordability and then the market gap. There were three planning principles. Draw your attention to the right, not yet. I'm sorry, Josh.
I'm just curious about the wording.
Oh, yeah,
in
sure.
there. It's a little different. Like there's preserve affordability versus addressing cost burden.
Yes.
And I mean, part of addressing affordability would be bringing on more affordable units, but preserve affordability would be focused just on the existing units, or am I just reading too much into that?
No, I think that's actually a distinction, and so it's something for council to wrestle with, which is the extent to which preserving affordability is it might fall into the necessary but not sufficient category for some, which is to say preserving affordability is necessary, but it might not be sufficient, right? There's no question that that's something I would recommend you wrestle with, and it is a distinction, yes.
Okay, so what you're telling me is that this plan is based on preserving affordability, not necessarily the other piece in terms of adding affordability.
I would say it prioritizes affordability more so than prioritizes the achievement of affordability through new construction.
Prioritizes preserving affordability.
Yeah, yes. Not to the exclusion of adding, but just we've given greater priority to it given the existing stocks.
Okay.
So I've alluded to the first, not all of the planning principles that we apply in the draft here. One is strategic and geographic linkage throughout, right? And so the caution note from your consultant here is just be careful, to not spread your resources too thin. Get the impact you can by concentrating your resources, in targeted areas. It is the most proven way to stretch public resources. The second is, you want this strategy, and this strategy does complement Plan DSM, take its direction from Plan DSM, and you want it to handshake without any disruption with the city's codes of ordinances, right? So it does those. And then finally, conditional deployment of public resources. You're in the driver's seat, right? It's your resources, right? Stipulate what you want, right? And so that's part of this. So the 6 strategy elements on the left, and I think in sum, if there's one diagram that shows, just like at the beginning, if there was one diagram that shows our assessment of the market, this is one diagram of how we see the strategy on the left, right? Which is that at the top, continue to capably administer the federal housing programs that you've got. Now, there's a huge asterisk to this. You don't need me to go on. I know some of you have made a trip to Washington, D.C. I don't know what your intelligence gathering, unearthed, but I know that all of our clients, right, across right now 7 states, are all struggling to figure out, right, what's going to happen to the entitlements, right? And so what are the implications? How do we think about it? And those are not insignificant issues. The timing of this draft is it's tricky. It's right in the middle of that. So it's a lot of uncertainty with that. However, having said that, continue, to the extent that those resources remain, they're so capably administered here in the city. They are exquisitely well managed. And so compliments to Chris Johansson's shop, continue that. Moving around on the clock, scale and modify ION and scale and modify Invest DSM. We'll come back to that a bit more. Expand the node and corridor work, so that really speaks to using your master planning processes, your tax increment financing as a tool, linking a scaled and modified ION to node and corridor work, moving around to 7 o'clock on the dial, master plan phased mixed income redevelopment when that makes sense. We've got a piece in here on significant down payment assistance. You do that now. We think it needs to be much more robust and much more geographically targeted. Come back to that in a minute. And then, in those instances where land values as a percentage of total development cost and as a percentage of total value are very, very high, and there's a probability of those rates rising, utilization of a land trust, right? So we'll speak to those more in a minute. When we look at the cost structure of this, there are effectively 6 cost centers here, federal grants, no dollar change recommended. We're recommending about a little bit more than $9 million in new bond financing. Yes.
Cumulative or annually?
Annually.
$9 million in bonding annually. Okay.
Everything up on this chart,
annual.
Councilman, is annual, okay? So you'll see in the white bar there, you are at about, let's see, where are we? Where we're at about 90, we're recommending, about $92 million a year, okay? So that's where you are. Right now, you're at $71.5 million a year. So that's the difference. The way to look at it is points 2 and 3 on the top right, the bonding and what we think the bonding will leverage from the private sector, 9 and 11, that constitutes the difference, right? So the way that we've worked this out is we think that private sector capital, that $11 million a year, will sit forever on the sideline unless it's pulled off the sideline, right? So you're spending 9 to get 11, right? And then you are geographically and strategically linking to a much greater degree than you do now all of your other programs. And in that you get the the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? So point 4 is on the abatement. We think the abatement needs to be revisited and thought through a little bit, in view of some of these findings, possibly reprogrammed. And if you're capable of reprogramming that, we think there's about $4.5 million, from the current abatement that can be forwarded into the new utilization that's recommended. Then you have the sales tax provision. We assume it continues. It's one of the it's just great governance. I'm still in awe of the two bites at the apple that you all had to go through several years ago to raise that capital. So it plays a profound role going forward. And then the CIP. So what that works out to is continuation of the federal programs in the bottom right, an allocation toward redevelopment, and point number 2, a significant increase for both in point 3 and 4, Invest DSM and ION, and then a range of other programs are being continued, right? So let's walk through this again. So if we take those 6 strategy elements, those building blocks, the principles, the resourcing concept, what we end up with is an action plan with these points, right? Which is, we really think the reorganization of the overall city disposition regarding funding and partnerships is critical, right? So there's the tail wagging the dog issue. I just want to, it's your resources. You need to decide. My recommendation is decide how you want to spend them, and drive that bus. Number 2 is continue to broadly administer your current federal housing programs. Just be mindful that they could be halved tomorrow. We just don't know. Okay, they could stay the same and change. They could be halved and change the same. I just don't think we know, right? Point 3, expand the capacity and reach of ION. Do the same for Invest DSM. Point 5, modify node and corridor work, and then really begin to tie that more intentionally with urban renewal and invest DSM's work. Point 6 is prevailing standards of care for residential property. It's just too low for you to compete against the suburbs and end up with the result that your tax base is capable of covering its costs and with inflation. And so point 6 can't be emphasized enough. Point 7 is to change the city's disposition toward net new below market rate housing. And so, for instance, there's a lot of LIHTC projects out there in the next 20 years that are going to need rehabilitation assistance. I suspect they'll need mortgage financing, could be second or third position, could be grants. You want to be all in on that. When proposals for new LIHTC projects come in, the state workforce notwithstanding, but the Section 42, we recommend that you pause on that until you have a fair share distribution of those projects across the region. And then once you do have a fair share distribution of tax credits projects across the region, that you much more carefully say yes to where they go. Right. So more on that.
So you're saying, I mean, you're recommending no new LIHTC projects in the city of Des Moines then?
Until the county, until there's a fair share distribution of LIHTC projects across Polk County, yes.
Right. And so if that doesn't come, you're saying no new LIHTC projects in Des Moines?
That is correct. It locates the problem where the problem exists, which is the fair share distribution.
I heard something slightly different,
Yes.
which is LIHTC should be focused in on the rehabilitation of necessary, no?
If there's an existing LIHTC that is, well, all existing LIHTCs eventually are going to come up for, going to need to be refreshed, right? In almost all cases, there will be a gap to be closed. You should stand ready to close those gaps, right, to maintain those stocks at the highest level possible. When a new proposal comes in for a new LIHTC project, our recommendation is after the region has a fair share distribution of LIHTCs, you should jump at saying yes. Until that, you should pause. That's our recommendation. Okay?
I mean, that's really what, so go ahead, Carl.
Two questions. So on number 6, is that creating a maintenance standard, exterior maintenance standard?
It very well could, yes. Yes, you're recognizing that a high volume of the residential property here is not maintained to a competitive standard, and that it does not make financial sense to get it to that standard. So you'll have to play the role, both on the carrot side and the stick side, as you've been doing, to do that as much as possible.
So raise the bar on what the expectation is so that it doesn't pull down the neighborhood, I guess?
That's a fair way to put it, yes. You're right. So it goes back to this issue, which is that anytime a property is marginal, and marginal can be its configuration, how well it's maintained, where it's located, some combination of all of the above. Anytime you've got some marginal component to it, demand will peel off, prices will come down, and you get the upside of more affordability. But you get the downside of fiscal stress on the city, right? And so so you get the both and is most revealed in the value of your residential real estate sitting at somewhere between 55 and 65% of your suburban counterparts.
Okay. Second question I had is, so we're all the way to slide 21, and we haven't even discussed schools in this at all.
Well, in part, your housing strategy doesn't have authority to speak directly to schools issues, right? But it is a critical, it has a critical relationship, which I will come to in subsequent slides.
Okay, it's as though our school system's being throttled or starved, and I mean, it's, impacting the housing market.
And vice versa. Yeah. But it's a feedback loop. There's no question that as demand softens for the housing stocks, and as prices fall, relative prices fall, the probability of an impact on the school system increases.
It gets back to the value too.
So, Charles, two things. On number 4.
Yes.
Expand, invest DSM.
Yes.
Explain to me a little bit about that. What are we looking at as middle market neighborhoods? What would that be? Obviously, it's neighborhoods that Invest DSM's not in right now.
So at the centerpiece of the Invest DSM conceit is that there are properties and blocks and neighborhoods that have sort of two truths about them, right? They are both vulnerable to decline, and they can be put back into a competitive position, right, fairly quickly if it's done strategically, right, as has been demonstrated. And so all we're saying here is you started off with four areas. You're now moving into 2 more. We're recommending several more still. And so it's a model that it has a very high leverage ratio, a 4-to-1 leverage ratio. We want to see that in expanded geographically. Army Post Road, for instance, Indiana Hills, you absolutely have geographic expansion that you want to consider there.
Okay.
Okay.
And then, the LIHTC.
Yes.
I hear a lot of that from, when it comes up to the neighborhoods of rezoning properties, because I've had multiple developers come and want to do development in my ward. And the neighbors, that is the message that I hear, at least in my ward, and I don't know, maybe Linda's even too, that, that we have our fair share of affordable housing in Ward 4. And so that message has been delivered to some of the developers that just don't understand why, hey, you have that land, why aren't you allowing that? Well, that's what the neighbors, I don't know what some of the other ward councilmen are hearing, but that's what I hear, and I've heard it for a long time, at least on the southeast side. So, I would agree with that until there is a balance that we have, even throughout our city, because it's not balanced throughout our city. No matter what everyone thinks, it's not.
So, Councilman, permission to go aside for a second?
Sure.
Okay. So there's a workaround here. It's not an easy workaround, but there's a work. This isn't in the report. This is just, The workaround is, it starts with grasping the profound difference between a developer of real estate and an owner of real estate. Mm-hmm. The profound difference, right? Okay? Good, as I've said on many occasions, and it bears saying over and over and over again, right? Good developers use someone else's money, right? Usually, when it comes to subsidized housing, the public sector's money, okay? Great developers only use somebody else's money, okay? Right? And so the extent to which, right, a proposal from a developer can be directly tied to foreknowledge on your part to who the future ownership entity is, right, and their equity stake in that deal, right, so that you don't have to clean up their mess in year 12, right, is your workaround. But you won't find that, okay, except 1/2 of the time, right? So there is a workaround, but I think it bears grasping that the math of a tax credit deal, right, has such a big gap that the gap effectively reveals itself in year 12, 13, 14, 15, and a bill will come due to clean that up, and it usually is going to come to the public sector. Now, whether that's the city, the county, the state, someplace, but it will usually come back to the public sector in some way, right? So you can get around that by saying, we'd like to see more owner equity in that, right?
Yeah.
We want you to absorb the risk, not the public sector to absorb the risk, right? So you've got these two issues actually are deeply connected. And as you deliberate on this, I would recommend thinking that through, okay?
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, please.
You talked about gap in year 12, 13.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on what you mean by what that gap is? Like, is that just a financing gap that's being filled by TIF or some other incentive, or are you talking about something else?
Well, It's not, each deal will present itself differently. You may not see this gap in year 12, you may see it in year 15 or 16, but you will see a gap when it comes time to do capital upgrades to a project, right? The rents are not, future rents will almost never support all of the debt necessary to upgrade that property, right? And there will almost always be a gap, right? And that gap will generally not be closed by that owner or by that developer, in part sometimes because they can't, right? But also because systemically the presumption and the conceit has been built into the program for decades, right? That the A city will always come and do the janitorial work, right?
And we have in the past.
And you have in the past. And you will again, right? You've got existing stocks.
But I tell you, there is one exception with the neighborhoods.
Yes.
Would be senior housing.
That is true. It is a different, but
That is different.
the wear and tear is different, and there's no question, okay?
I-
Yes,
I think we have to tighten it up even further, that Charles has explained the capital side of the challenges with the light tech projects, but the reality is there's an operating side as well. City services cost a lot of money, and the revenue that we can generate off of property taxes from light tech projects is extremely low. And there's an amount that we can't afford, and we've surpassed that, quite frankly. And so you have the neighborhood issues, very real. You have the capital issues, very real. And I feel responsible that I need to talk more about our annual operating cost and the imbalance that we deal with as well. And it's real.
Thank you.
May I also add, LIHTC has been a very valuable tool in that it creates new energy-efficient housing for people who don't have the means that many other people don't have. The challenge I have had with the program is it's solely designed by the state. The rules change year to year as to what areas qualify in the point system. And there have been times where Polk County as a whole has gotten no light tech projects. So if there's some way that we can work, well,
Change the rules.
change the rules. And if we could change the rules to the point where we can have some light tech units in combination with other projects or mixing people, that would be a home run.
I want to underscore the last point. So if you then jump to point 8, which is you've got, fallow intersections. There are a number of struggling commercial intersections, commercial corridors, right? So and the city has several thousand parcels in its inventory, in its portfolio. One can easily foresee the utilization at scale of a considerable amount of acreage within which a new LIHTC makes perfect sense, provided it's scaled properly, right? Second point, to your first point, Councilman, I think the state's QAP is very wanting. We scoured the state's QAP, we looked at it carefully. It's difficult to navigate. It's not written really to help in a way that puts front and center the fiscal reality of the city of Des Moines. And so developers can game the QAP point system to obtain an award, right, that works for the deal, but doesn't always work for the city. And I totally concur that working with the state to improve the QAP makes perfect sense. Absolutely. No question. So then what happens is, you'll see here, there are these strategy elements. You'll remember from this diagram here, there's some building blocks, the resourcing concept, and so that works into a series of general tasks. So the first was there are 8 general tasks we recommend in the draft. Reorganize the overall city disposition regarding funding and partnerships, right? So the key point again and again is alignment, right? So you don't want to partner with actors on projects where those projects are not aligned with the objective of raising standards, for instance. You don't want to find yourself partnering with actors that will result in projects that aren't contributing, right, to strengthening the city's position in the region, right? So alignment, 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 okay? That's critical. In this first task, really spend time combing through the abatement, okay? We think that the abatement is an opportunity to really reprogram it and redirect a piece of the abatement funds, perhaps $4.5 million, back into the work of scaling ION and scaling Invest DSM.
So is your recommendation eliminating completely all of the abatement, or is it scale back to, right now it's a 6-year sliding scale? What do you see a recommendation? Just eliminate it all, even through multifamily also?
I'm not sure I would eliminate it all. I would actually, I think this is one where we're really pulling together a handful of folks, staff experts, yourself, others on council, but combing through it and asking the question, does it really, pass the but-for test? Working through that, what's the extent to which we could reprogram that and have more direct impact on the outcomes we want? I think at a minimum, it deserves really working through it.
Your assumptions at 4 million allow for some of it to remain?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because it's at
Especially
11.
rehab.
So we did, yes.
I guess we need to do, that needs to be clarified.
Yes, fair point. Okay. It's I'm sorry, John. Yeah.
Well, on that piece, I was going to look to city legal. I could use sort of a primer on what we are able to do with abatement, kind of. I mean, it'd be good to know where our abatement is now, but it would be helpful as we have this discussion to just get what are the range of options that we have and can legally do under the existing system. Because I'm not sure. I mean, I think all of us come onto the council and there's an abatement system in place, and that's kind of, we work around that and trim on the edges. But if we're tackling a housing strategy, I'd like to understand a little better what the full range of things that we could consider or could do.
Isn't it our policy that we create?
It's very flexible. I'll leave it at that for now. But it is very flexible.
Right, it is our policy. What I'm trying to say is if we're going to revisit the policy, I want to understand what the constraints are in terms of what we can and cannot do. And I just...
But is that from a legal standpoint, or is that from an economic, financial standpoint? Because legally, I mean, isn't it just our policy, I guess? Jeff, I'm confused about that.
Well, I mean, it's a statutory grant, so, of authority, so there's going to be guardrails on the statute. Then council can adopt, as Scott said, it's very flexible, council can adopt within that statutory framework. So we'll be happy to get that put together for you. But, I mean, there are, you can't make random decisions that are contrary to the statute. Sure.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about not taking it away from what folks have, but going forward, if we change our policy legally, if 4 of us would agree to change the policy going forward, not going back to what we've done, legally, we can do that, can't we?
Oh, absolutely, but within the statutory framework.
Right. And
Like classes of property.
that's what I'm asking to understand.
Okay.
Is what is
Okay.
the statutory framework?
Yeah, absolutely.
The second and third tasks are sort of, combined here. Again, this alignment issue, it's just so critical. The land trust work as a means of reducing future costs of housing in high value and high rates of appreciation areas, where you've got land. It's an opportunity for you to deed restrict in a manner that contributes to the affordability challenge, and then the ION expansion. So let me go back a few slides here. We've got, ION is now a little over $2 million. Our view is to move that about 3 times up to $6 million, right? So it's a significant increase in funds, for property upgrades, right? That's a huge increase. We think it's time for that. We think the program is just demonstrated that it's people want it, it works, it it checks every good public policy box. It's time to grow that. So that's also growing, it's growing both the X and the Y. It's the number of households that you would reach, but also in view of inflation, really raising the ceiling on that, okay? All right. On tasks 4, it's to expand Invest DSM, and so this is where we're recommending, if we go back to Invest DSM on the budget there, where are we? It's at 5. We're recommending that the city portion go to 12.25. So that's a significant increase, right? And so now you've got to be able to scale that organization and deploy those resources. Our recommendation is South Park, Watcher South, Merle Hay, Indianola Hill next up, and then really actively connect that to node and corridor work, really begin, just building the capacity to go from an organization, from 1 to 1.7 times its size, right? So those are two big pieces here.
So are you saying 12 from just the city's portion, or?
Yes.
So we're going from 5 to 12?
This presumes constant at the county, no reduction at the county, but this is going from 5 to 12 for the city. Yes, it's huge. Okay?
So then that would be 17 total with the county money.
Correct. Okay.
All things staying the same.
Yeah, that's significant.
There's quite a few south side.
Yeah, no, I see that.
Okay, and you want that, all of that, whether that's Invest DSM or, and its new SIDs, or ION, right? You want those as closely curated as possible, right? So that they are working closely together with master planning of corridor redevelopment, intersection redevelopment, and that they're all working together under Plan DSM, right?
So is that a bonding thing
Yes.
also? Or?
That accumulates to the 9 million
Okay.
and reprogramming of the abatement.
Okay.
Then we come back to the tasks 5, 6, and 7, which really are the node and corridor work. So we began to look at your urban renewal areas, and so areas that that really we thought you wanted to focus on were Indianola Hill, South Park, and key sections of Southwest 14th, Army Post Road, and Southwest 9th, Highland Park, Union Park, and key sections. And sorry for the typo, that's me, on Grandview. Okay, so.
Is that Southwest 14th or Southeast 14th? The first one? Because South Park and Indianola Hills.
Southeast, yes. That's on me again.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's also on Mike Ludwig, who was supposed to type check these things. So I just want to be sure that Mike.
Sure, taking blame.
Cody Christensen, nice.
Okay, so let's see. And then finally, we talked about this at our last time, which is establish, redevelopment guidelines, begin preliminary redevelopment planning, and develop private sector partnerships needed for redevelopment of key areas of the city. So on the redevelopment issues, for instance, if you take a look at how Columbus Park has sort of begun to evolve, Drake Park, the template, pieces of the template are there. With increased funding on the redevelopment side, on the ION side, and on the Invest DSM side, all strategically linked to master planning and corridor and node redevelopment, we think you've got an opportunity to really begin rethinking how to do some whole block work on a voluntary level, where it makes market sense, where there's the opportunity to really slowly 1-2 blocks a year, to the extent, again, that market pricing and market conditions work, where you can begin to redevelop some sections of the city. And the objective, it's in the document. This is a illustration we put together. You'll remember from our last time. Whenever you would consider redevelopment, our recommendation is there should always be a third preserved upgrade, that's upgraded affordable, a third that's market rate rehab, and then the densities will change, block and area by area, year by year. But, we would anticipate roughly a third as infill market rate new construction, right? And keeping those thirds in mind, we would anticipate sometimes you'll be 2/3, 1/3, sometimes, it'll be flipped on its head, but overall your portfolio should always aim for this in the same way that a TIF project should always aim to have some deed-restricted inclusionary affordable on a new project. So you're really looking for portfolio balance across the spectrum. So if we go all the way back to the very, very beginning of the discussion, it's how do we get this more diverse supply in point one of housing choices, right? Really diversify the stocks overall to market better across the region, to put yourselves on a competitive position, regionally for the next 2-3 decades, right? So that's the essence of the strategy. I can take any questions. There may be one, let me double check, I didn't forget something at the end.
Yeah, can you go to that
Oh,
last
sure.
slide?
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think it's good to clarify.
Yes, absolutely.
Right now, while you're at the podium.
Yes.
That this is a voluntary, we're not coming to take folks' homes to, I know maybe some of your other comments the last time you were here kind of in the press were
Distorted by the press?
maybe not as clear as.
No, let me be clear. They were distorted by the press. I'm going to be very clear. It's voluntary. Voluntary.
Voluntary.
Once.
Voluntary.
Twice.
Yep. Voluntary.
Voluntary.
Okay.
Okay, we're in agreement?
Yeah,
Okay.
I know that's what you meant, but I just want to be clear that we're going to say that. It's voluntary.
Yes. One more time.
Voluntary, right.
We're in it
Okay.
together.
All right, we're good.
Okay,
Mayor?
I'll just open it up. Does anyone have some additional questions and review? And thank you for all the information.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Councilman Coleman, just one last wrap-up slide. Not to throw the mayor under the bus, but the mayor was very clear to us at the outset, right? Make it realistic, right? Just don't sugarcoat it. Make it realistic. Make it, just hew to that principle over and over and over again. And so I think we've tried to do that. I think the draft you have in front of you is realistic, and it's a credit to council, mayor, senior staff that we've landed here. So with that.
Right now, we don't want to throw anyone under a bus in Des Moines, so.
Councilman Coleman?
I do, first off, like, developing this is never easy, and I know some of my colleagues participated in the committee, so thank you. I always appreciate you being here, and I've been on the council where we've hired hundreds of consultants, and generally, I think most of them approach it like, I wonder what the city really wants to hear, and let me fashion my report so they get exactly what they want to hear. And this is the second time you've come to Des Moines for a consultant help to the city, and I think you've done really well challenging us and delivering data to us in ways that I've never seen before, and I want to thank you for that. I do appreciate you want to do it a fifth time, voluntary? Because I do think that, the key principle is the city should be helping every happy homeowner that wants to stay in their house, and to help them that we have tools that help them stay there, another 10, 20, 40 years, whatever they want to be there. We want, like, you talked a lot about the market and responding to market trends. The one piece of the market is we want people that live in Des Moines to be happy here, and we want them to stay, and we want them to live in houses that they're happy with. And so I appreciate that clarification. I do have a couple of things, if I can read my writing. On slide 9, I don't know if you want to go back to it.
Sure.
As we're so on slide 9, there's a rate of growth that compares us. The suburbs have a lot more new construction than we do as a
Yes.
percentage.
Yes.
So is this kind of organic growth, or does the suburbs and us also, does this include new construction as part of the growth?
Ask me the question again.
Okay, sometimes you hear like publicly traded companies say like, this compares same store sales. Like, is this comparing the growth of our housing stock from a decade ago and what it's done, or does this also filter in new construction?
It does filter in, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I would say this, the 55% is more impressive than.
Quite. Absolutely.
Because that's happened organically.
Right.
You know, in a market where we're fighting a lot of things. The second one is on slide 10. These are kind of, so on the right-hand side, it says we're plus 5,000, we're fewer than 11,000. I guess my question for you is, in the data that you've collected, could you help us with additional data
Sure.
in terms of what the other suburban partners of ours, what their numbers would be? Do you have that?
We do have that, actually.
By
and-
community?
Yes, and so, I mean, it's just a matter of some subtractions. I'll get you that, if not today, tomorrow, absolutely. That's an easy one for us to get.
Yeah.
Sure,
Because
absolutely.
I do think that there is necessary conversations that we haven't really been able to have about data. It's been more philosophical. And this comes up all the time, as you can imagine. It's to me, central to the discussion about funding DART. And the degree to which our citizens can generate income for DART at a level far different than other regional
For sure,
communities.
yes.
Because of, I'd love that.
And what you'll see is that number, so it's all it all zeroes out, right? So you'll see that 11,445, right? It'll get distributed, right? So you'll end up with Waukee getting, they'll be up a certain number, right? Urbandale will be up a certain number, right? And on the flip side, the 5,000 a year up, they'll be down a certain number. So it'll all zero out, but I will get you those numbers. That's a great question.
If you jump forward to a slide 11, then I'm interested in what data you and your team has on the 10,000 households that are not currently receiving assistance, but, their demographics would suggest they are in the same category as the 4,000 that are. Do you see the two numbers?
Yes, I do. And so you'll end up, they'll be, in all cases, cost burden, in some cases severely cost burden, and in many, many, many cases, they will get a double whammy. They'll be both cost burdened, they'll be overpaying for under quality, right? So that's probably the best reflection of the circumstance you're coping with, is you've got thousands of households paying more than they can afford for a terrible unit, right? So yes, we will get you that as well. That's a great question.
And my last comment is actually something that Scott mentioned about our operating cost. I think sometimes the tension that we have at this table about delivering a world-class city to our citizens doesn't translate real well when you read reports like yours. So to me, and here's what I mean. Like, we spent a chunk of the spring trying to figure out if we could keep Birdland Pool open. We are. That's good, and I'm thankful for that. But we're also going to close all the pools a couple of weeks a year on a rotating basis. Like there's a very bold connected line between helping 5,000 homeowners increase the value of their house by $25,000 and being able to provide the level of services that we want, like pools and other things that our citizens have come to expect. And I do feel like we know this, our staff knows this, but we're at the edge of the cliff right now of looking at ways where our structural deficit, that our housing stock hasn't kept up with the cost of government, that we're going to go through many cycles of service cuts to our citizens because of the data that you presented today. And I think the more we can connect to some real life things that we're struggling with, like how many houses, what do we need to get to keep our pools open and thriving, to provide the level of, I think it's the point you were making, Scott, and we get it here because we deal with it every day, but I'm not sure our citizens make the connection between how well we have to do. Like, people complain to me about their assessments all the time. And you know what I always say? That should be your city council report card. If your property is going up faster than you expected, that's your largest investment. We want your assessments to go up. And on top of that, it lets us fund a city that we can be proud of. So I do think there's still work that we have to do to draw that line for our citizens for the way in which they experience government, which is through the services that we provide.
There's a paradox that in many of our client cities where they've struggled with either population loss on the one hand, flat population, or just, rates of growth that aren't keeping up with their competition. And no better example would be that in a northern climate, this is not Des Moines, but a northeastern climate where we do a lot of work, your freeze-thaw issues would tend to dictate you need about $25,000 per linear mile of road to take care of them, in the budget, right? And so what happens is the better the city manager is at actually fixing things and duct taping things, the more disguised the problem is. So what happens? Population loses a little bit, resistance to compensating at the lost tax revenue by raising the mill rate. That resistance goes up. The road maintenance budget doesn't go anywhere. It's staying the same. In fact, you have inflation to deal with. So what does the city manager in a northeastern city do? They spend $24,000 instead of $25,000. Nobody notices it for a while. And then the next year they spend $23,000. And then pretty soon, right, you go from A to B to C to D quality, and now you're in a real catch-up position, right? And all of it correlates to how many households do you have, X, and what are the incomes of those in the households, Y, and does the X times Y put you in a competitive position with your suburban counterparts who have newer infrastructure and every competitive advantage there is baked in? So I think the point is well made. We probably could have done a better job in this document tying that to those fiscal issues, but it's a point well taken.
Is there, Councilman Buss?
Yes, could we go back to the LIHTC issue again? So I think you said we should stall on accepting more LIHTC projects until our suburban friends share the joy, right?
Our recommendation is that the tax credit as a tool, properly developed at the right location, can make a lot of sense. And across the region, it's not distributed in a balanced way. I would put the pause button on until a regional distribution is achieved.
Well, I don't see in the near future that there's going to be a regional distribution. I mean, they don't have an appetite for.
Right. Translation is Des Moines stops doing LIHTC and affordable housing. At least that's what this plan says. I mean,
Well,
we can pretend like we're going to get to a fair share, but the amount of catch-up that they have to do and the lack of, it's not being discussed at those tables right now. So it's going to take years for them to get there, if at all. And what that means is that as a region, we further fall behind from an affordability perspective. And, I think that's a problem. And I think we should be doing what we can. And one of the concerns that I have with this plan, it's kind of the countervailing observation to Councilmember Coleman, right? I do see, and there is very much a direct line between our tax base and the level of service that we can provide. But when we talk about providing service to all residents, part of that means figuring out how we make sure that no matter who you are, no matter what stage of life you're at, we can help you find housing that works for you in Des Moines. And sometimes that means we have to raise our standards so that low income doesn't mean substandard. That's absolutely a part of what we do. But we can't, there are low income folks in this community, and will continue to be in this community, that aren't just seniors. We can't just do senior affordable housing. We need to think about that comprehensively as part of a strategy. And I feel like there are pieces that are missing in this strategy. in terms of tackling affordability. And not only that, but there are things that I have concern with that I think take us back from affordability, that what this does is it pushes problems that we are struggling with as a community, and it says until others do this, we're just kind of not going to tackle those problems anymore. And that to me is a problem, because I think they get bigger for all of us if we take that approach. And I think that that's something a housing strategy needs to, I think this piece does a great job if the housing strategy was only about increasing values, but I think the housing strategy is about more than that, and that's missing from this.
I need to add some clarity on the tax credit side. Not all tax credit programs are created equally. There are some workforce housing tax credits that are going to make a lot of sense to us versus the Section 42, which I think is the main reference here, because those are the ones that literally pay hundreds of dollars a year per unit that don't pencil out for providing enough revenue for the operations of a city and the capital that is absolutely necessary upon refreshing. So again, this is a recommendation, and we needed to hear that recommendation so that we could talk through, well, maybe the Section 42 type credits do need to be on pause, but some of the housing workforce credits, when they make sense in the right place, might be able to still advance. So we can offer up similar to the abatement request, we can offer up some of the comparability of different tax credit programs to understand that more. Did I nail that, Mike? I want to make
The
sure.
neighbors are
Mike.
okay with the workforce.
Yeah.
We built workforce on the corridors. It is the LIHTC that they have no appetite.
I think the point too is that, to the point, is there other ways we can work with the state on coming up with new regulations and new recommendations that create a balance on how we do things? So I'll turn it over to.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think the key to that is Scott's exactly correct. Not all the programs are equal in their impact. And two, alignment was a key issue that Charles made in this presentation. And from my perspective right now, with a lot of the different programs, the tail is wagging the dog. The QAP highly emphasizes, for example, being in a qualified census tract, which is basically concentrating new affordable housing units in areas that are already predominantly low and moderate income neighborhoods. So while that may make some sense in upgrading quality in a particular area over what exists, what we're really hoping to do is encourage that housing to be in mixed income neighborhoods where there's mix. So it may make more sense. We may not get as many points on a project because it's not in a qualified census tract, but we might want to utilize that program in an area where there's already market rate housing in existence that we can balance with affordable housing in those areas. So it's locational, and it's not all programs are equal from a taxation standpoint, both. So, but exactly, the second point was aligning it with looking at not all projects are equal. Right now, when those applications come in, we pretty much treat them all equal. When they come in, they're not all equal. We need to be looking probably closer at how much equity is in a project. How are they going to own it long-term? I would argue the long-term ownership is probably as big of a key as anything, because if they're turning and flipping it and getting out of it, they've probably underestimated their maintenance and operating budget for that project going forward, because they're not going to be long-term holders of it. So looking at.
It applies to market rate just as much as it does.
It does in all. It does in all. So it applies to, that same principle applies to our emphasis on market rate housing. Are we building quality up front that's going to be durable, that's going to last long-term? It relates, all of these concepts all relate, is my point. It's locational and it's alignment.
Go ahead.
So, how are we going to engage the public or seek public input on this?
So tomorrow, first of all, we have a steering committee meeting this afternoon with our 16-member steering committee that worked on the project for the last 8 months. Tomorrow, we will release the document through our public information office on the city's website, and there'll be a survey with the document link on there. And we're going to keep that open until, I believe, June 15th. And then we'll assemble all the comments and survey responses that we get and bring that forward to council.
Okay. So will there be any public meetings for?
At this point, it's just the public survey that we're planning on that.
Just a survey?
Yes. But it follows up on the survey that we did previously in the early stages of this project too. Now, I will say that this plan incorporates numerous other planning efforts that have already preceded it. So when we did the consolidated plan that we had to submit to HUD, I mean, Jody's here, she worked on that plan. That was factored into the recommendations you're seeing in this plan. The outreach that was incorporated with that is factored into this plan. Last week, they just released the homeless services strategy document. Our consultant's aware of that document as well. Has had conversation with the planning consultant, worked on that. So none of this has been done in a vacuum. It's been in light of all those other plans.
And I appreciate your point, Councilman Mandelbaum, but, you know, I have a lot of the green space along with Councilwoman Westergaard that would build LIHTC and have probably the most of it. There's not a lot of land south of Grand that you can build that. But I bet if there was a project that came forward south of Grand, your neighbors might feel a little bit different. It might feel like some of my neighbors feel like putting them in their backyard all the time, consistently. Because when you come on my side of town and you see the projects that we've had and we've had for years and the affordability that we've got, even throughout the entire neighborhoods, the affordability, it's different than some of the areas you represent. So I understand and I appreciate your viewpoint of it, but you're not living it like some of the others are.
Well,
let's
talk about that, because
you could say that that's.
Okay,
But let's talk about it, because we were just awarded a LIHTC project at 31st and Ingersoll. And one of the things, and we frequently, and I do have a question, because I don't get the node and corridor work, and I look at the recommendations there, and I don't understand the recommendations of the node and corridor. But I want to talk about how this all fits together, right? Because Ingersoll is a model, and it's a place that is attracting a lot of private development. Now, one of the things that Ingersoll had for years and years, and it still has some of it, but it had a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing.
because it was older stock.
It was older stock, it was naturally occurring affordable housing, but that's part of what made Ingersoll work, right? The people who work at the bars and restaurants and the places that everyone in the community, not just south of Grand, or everyone likes to visit on Ingersoll, the folks who work at those shops and restaurants can actually live in the Ingersoll district because there is naturally occurring affordable housing. As Ingersoll's been more successful, some of that housing has been redeveloped, and the most affordable portions of that corridor have continued to be pushed away. And if that corridor is going to work, it needs affordability. It needs the folks who work on the corridor to be able to live on that corridor. And we're looking for opportunities to do that, right? Star Lofts has been built. Sure. We're doing another, again, and this would be the type of project that I think under this housing plan, I don't think the Goldfinch, like we're saying that we don't want projects like the Goldfinch Lofts. I mean, that's what we're saying. We're saying pause. We're saying pause. Now, we could rewrite it to be a little more nuanced, but we are saying pause. We're not saying pause some and evaluate on a case-by-case basis. Like what this says on page 65 is that it all should stop. And that means now maybe we just plan on ignoring it all and evaluating on a case by case, but I'd prefer that our plan say what we mean and have a level of nuance there. But I think it's a problem broadly to say we don't want this. And I think some of what is also missing, I think it's important to listen to the feedback of neighbors, but that's not the only piece of a housing strategy. And part of what we also need to do is we need to think about how we make some of this easier to build housing. You know, when Mike was talking about aligning this on the corridors, does that mean we're going to, and I don't see anything in here about changing policy to help align and make it easier to build the type of housing that we're talking about on nodes and corridors or in key places, right? That's often one of the barriers to achieving some of these housing pieces as well.
You want to speak to that?
And I think that needs to be part of a comprehensive housing strategy.
I think one thing too, when you look at when we talk about areas of town, I think when you look at Ingersoll, you have a balance, and that's what we're talking about. You have all those different, you have some market rate, you have all kinds, it's not the 108, 240 units all in one location. Again, it gets back to services, it gets back to having a balance within our city. And not that we're going to do, LIHTC, we probably should look at how we can rework it or work with the state on how you get points into projects. But the two projects you bring up are very small projects, and they enhance, and they have retail below, and they have a different component than just housing. So I think that when we're looking at housing strategy, this whole thing to me is about a balance. We have a lot of home owners they're renting, right? And I know I have blocks I can walk where the quality needs to be improved. Just because it's low quality is why, and I bet they're paying probably not the great market rate for the quality they're getting. I think that's the bigger concern for me. So that's where the ION and some of those programs come in as strong importance. And we know already from examples on ION what is being done for the people that can't afford it, whether it's the seniors or whether it's whatever. Stark improvements and people being able to stay in their home and is safe so it doesn't go down. I think that's the key is we want the quality to be safe, clean, and secure for people to stay, not only for today, but for tomorrow. And we're talking 20 years out. This is the long-range strategy. And like we all know, if you walk our streets, that there's a lot of homes that need help. And that's where I think this whole strategy is about, on how we build the supports and how we can keep doing the services that people ask for us. To Councilman Coleman's, sorry. When you're closing pools and every 2 weeks we're going to have close downs, it costs, we've got to be able to secure and develop every piece of property. As I've always said, every piece of property needs to be developed to what it should be or could be to support the services our citizens are expecting. And that's where I see we've got to start moving towards that as the goal. And it can't be all one and it can't be all the other. But we need a better balance and a strategic way to get there.
I just would point out that we do make it very clear that, for example, new projects, new TIF work on currently fallow intersections, right? So a new master plan project would have a built-in requirement of an inclusionary component for households at 60% or below, right? So we would recommend that. And that, not setting aside as in, as if it's a de minimis issue, but what can be done by right can be done by right. Having said that, right, what you really want is a mixed income product all the time, as frequently as possible. A truly mixed income product that contributes to the economic health of the city, right? And so your TIF, your marriage, your historic marriage of TIF and abatement and master planning at key intersections for redevelopment illustrates mixed income, high quality, tax base improving projects, right? That's very much a rinse, wash, repeat to the extent that you've got demand for that, right? Without question. The issue with a LIHTC project, the new LIHTC project, is that technically one can get away with asserting it's a mixed income project, but often they're so skewed that it's a mixed income project. It's a sleight of hand. It's not really a mixed income project, and it's certainly not addressing the economic imperative issue, right? So I want to explain where we came at this. Significantly increasing ION and significantly increasing Invest DSM to upgrade existing stocks and stipulating that, apart from the by right issues, all redevelopment, all new projects that have any TIF or abatement in them should be mixed income. So that's how you get, I think, to the mayor's issue of balance. On the new, it's a mix, and on the existing, it's a preservation imperative. Those two together actually are quite responsive to two things: how much resources you have to bring to bear and the magnitude of the problem. They really do respond to the affordability issue. I would respectfully quarrel with the notion that this doesn't address affordability.
And just to be clear, you were talking about one building on Ingersoll or 31st. I'm talking about them building 9 buildings, similar to your one building on East 14th. That's a big difference than one building. When you look at the Melbourne property before I was on the council, and it infiltrates, it's on the corridor, but then it dives into the neighborhood and you build 10 buildings, that is what the neighbors are like. Okay, we've got our fair share. That's enough. And that's the difference from different sides of town. And I know that we're going to philosophically disagree with it.
Okay, let's just keep going forward
that's
on. We don't need to discuss sides of town. I think we've made that point.
Well,
I think it's all about the balance. And does anyone else have any other comments? Because it's 9 o'clock.
I just like to say, and for process sake, and again, I wasn't on the committee, but when I say that I think this is a good report, it doesn't necessarily mean I agree with every aspect of it.
Right.
I think it informs us, and I want to make sure that as we go to public comment and others, that like people know that this is going to inform policies of the city, but each of those policies should come back to us. And I guess I say
I think
that.
that's what it's meant. This is the recommendation. This is what we've asked for, to get the really data points that we maybe haven't had, especially when, like, with the extra ones that you want, Councilman Coleman, and things like that. So I think it gives us a data point and the realism of what we have to face in Des Moines. We will have the committee will look at it again. Again, we can determine where we want to go with this and what aspects we want, or we want to enhance, or how we want to tweak it. But this at least gives us a starting point and a relation of really where we are at as a city and what we need to do to make sure that in 20 years we can provide the services that our citizens deserve. So, other than that, anything?
I do just have a question, and I don't know where it goes, but like the node and corridor recommendation, that feels like it's missing a lot of the nodes and corridors
Further,
that I would want to see work on, and I just want to make sure that is, because I think we're going to be asked to vote on this when it comes back, right? So I'd like to see, I hope that there are changes, at least in a few areas in this report before it comes back to us. And the node and corridor, I'd welcome it only specifically calls out, I think, Southeast 14th.
I think those were maybe the first recommendations based on the fact that they've had the least intention spent on them right now.
Army Post.
But that doesn't mean the strategy can't be replicated for any node or corridor. These are called out because I think they saw, based on their research, the lack of investment and the need to rebuild. But, am I wrong?
No, where we would recommend you seek future guidance is, what does Plan DSM tell us? This is your starting place. what's the extent to which we have resources to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 corridors? What's our ambition? So notably missing in the resourcing strategy there was the TIF line item, because we just don't know what that's going to be at any particular time. And so we would fully embrace as many nodes getting redeveloped as possible to the greatest extent that the current code of ordinances allows and that Plan DSM directs. And if it's insufficient, right, then that's the time to go back to the codes, through master planning, really take a look at, what we can do by right on these intersections. What are the gaps closed by increased density? Are they closed by increased, direct cash contributions from the city? What's the extent to which it handshakes with your transportation plan? As you get direction from Plan DSM, I think you will find, as the mayor said, all corridors are theoretically in play. This is your starting place.
I see this report as information, statistics. It doesn't talk about where and how. That's what we have to.
A little bit of how.
It does talk about where and how something.
Well, it talks about funding sources, but nothing geographically.
Well, it has some starting points.
It does have some geographic in those key recommendations. I mean,
Oh, that's because that's our key recommendation of areas. That doesn't mean that that's exactly where it possibly could be. It's just the starting point of where we should look if we are really going after it, because a lot of the other corridors and some of the other instances have Invest DSM. They have some of the other things going on or have had a lot of money input into them already. But it, I guess, means we have a lot of opportunity.
Just a process question. We're going to be voting on this, is what I've heard, but are we going to tackle the tax abatement portion of it first? Or we're going to vote on this, then we're going to tackle some of how we're going to fund this? Or what's the plan here?
We could go either direction. I would like to have the conversation about abatement in June.
Okay.
So that you
So that
may
would
not
be-
have a final answer, but we can at least understand where we're headed, so that we know we'll have 4 million.
When would we be voting on this?
So June 30th is what the intent is right now.
So we would have an abatement kind of
Discussion.
discussion.
So, yes, we need to have that.
At least, I think that's an important part, and I appreciate that this is a
So we can-
realistic plan, and we can actually do it, it looks like, with the funding that is put out there, correct? Or-
That's part of what will come back to you, is what that debt structure will look like and what
Right.
those obligations are going to be. So there's nothing without consequence.
Yeah.
It is a risk-benefit analysis that we'll need to be able to show you that what does the 9 million a year require in additional tax revenues and things of that nature. So
Okay.
again, we'll be mostly down that path where you can get comfortable that the abatement and the debt issuances can happen to the scale you're looking at.
Okay.
Okay, with that, thank everybody for being here today, and this meeting is adjourned.
Sorry.